So today we're going to talk about graphing basics with quadratic equations. Go ahead and take a moment and pause and set up your paper on the right-hand side with quadratic equations, Unit 6A, Homework 1 with the appropriate date, and anything for questions or comments on the right-hand side before continuing on. So we have two forms when we're talking about quadratic equations. We have the standard form, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And we have vertex form, y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So when we're looking at the values of a, when a is positive, you're going to be looking at a graph or a parabola that opens up. And then here, this point right here is known as a vertex. And the point labeled negative 2, 4 is what's going to be known as a minimum. And our minimum value would be 4. So anytime you have a parabola that opens up, it's going to have a minimum point, or the lowest point on the graph, which is the vertex. And that's going to be related to the lowest y value, or 4. Take a moment, pause, copy before continuing on. Now when looking at standard or vertex form, notice we can also have a negative a value. And this is going to give me a graph or a parabola that opens downward. We still have a vertex, and this one is 1, negative 1. And because it opens down, this is going to be known as a maximum point, or the highest point on the graph. And once again, it's still related to the y value, or negative 1. The highest it goes is negative 1. Go ahead, take a moment, pause, copy before continuing on. So when looking at a graph of a quadratic, which is known as a parabola, there's a couple of key characteristics we want to keep an eye out for. We already know about the vertex, the highest or the lowest point on the graph. In this case, it's the highest point on the graph. And we can draw a line through that vertex, and it's going to bisect or cut our parabola into two equal halves. And this is what's known as the axis of symmetry. And you notice it's going to be a vertical line, so we can label it as x equals negative 2. Some other points to be aware of is, where does your parabola hit the x-axis? Here it hits twice. And these are what is known as your x-intercepts, but there's some other names they can go by as well. They're called zeros. They're also known as the solution. So whenever we're solving a quadratic, these would be the points we're solving for, the x-intercepts. And they're also called roots. And so here, negative 4, 0, and 0, 0 would be my x-intercepts. Go ahead and take a moment, pause, copy. It's important to know all of these possible names for these 2 points because they can ask it in any variety of way in questions. So go ahead, take a moment, pause, copy before continuing on. So when looking at standard form or vertex form of an equation, it's important to be able to label the pieces that you're looking for. So we're going to start with standard form, and here we have y equals 2x squared. And the 2 is going to be known as your a value. It matches up with the a value in your standard form. So once again, we have a value here, and then here we have the 3. Now because it does not have a variable associated with it, this is your c value, or your constant term. And then here we have a, and here we have the b value. The a value is always associated with this x squared. The b value is always associated with the x. And then of course our constant term has no variable associated with it. So being able to know which of these variables is A, B, or C is important. Let's take a look at the vertex form. So once again, we know what the A value looks like. It's always associated with the x squared term. It's always sitting out in front of the squared term. So here I would have my A value, but inside with x is going to be my H value. So we have the A value and the H value, and then outside, kind of tagging along at the end, will be your K value. Now, in the future lessons, we're going to get into what we would do with these values, but for right now, just being able to identify them and know which one is which is important. Take a moment, pause, copy before continuing on. So when we're dealing with standard form of a quadratic, there's some calculator steps that are important to know. And you're going to see 6 steps here, and we're going to be applying these in class when you come to class next. But it's going to help us find the maximum or minimum when we're graphing the standard form of a quadratic equation in our calculator. So go ahead and take a moment, pause, copy down the steps, and make sure that you have these available to you in our next class lesson. So the last piece I want to talk about is the vertex form and why it's a little different from standard form, and what this H and K really do for us. So when we're looking at vertex form of a quadratic, the H and K actually represent the vertex of our quadratic or our parabola. Remember that the H, or the X value, is the axis of symmetry, and that the K value is going to represent the maximum or minimum, depending on if it opens up or down, which is related to the Y value. Go ahead and take a moment, pause, and copy before continuing on to your try it out. So here for your try it out, I'd like you to answer the following 5 questions using this graph on the right. And then we'll discuss your answers when you come to class next and make sure we clear up any misconceptions or problems that you might have had. Go ahead and take a moment, try it out, and I'll see you next class.